Hey there, welcome back to another behind the scenes peek at Based on a True Story, the podcast that compares your favorite Hollywood movies with history. I'm Dan Lefebvre, host of the podcast, and if you've seen any of these behind the scenes videos before, you kind of have an idea of what we're doing here. But if this is your first time, welcome. Make sure you hit subscribe so you can actually listen to the podcast itself. Because what we're going to be doing in this video is not recording the podcast. We're not editing the podcast. We're going to be creating graphics for the podcast. And in particular, we're going to be creating graphics for an episode on the movie Finding Neverland. Now, that's the movie starring Johnny Depp and Kate Winslet that tells the story of J.M. Barrie, who is the author of Peter Pan. So what we're going to do is create the graphics that will support the episode over at basedonatruestorypodcast.com. Now, to do that, I'm going to need to hop onto this computer over here. So let's get started. Alrighty, so let's dive into this. Now, as I mentioned in the introduction, we're going to be creating graphics about the movie Finding Neverland, which is about author J.M. Barrie, or James Michael Barrie. So the graphics we're going to be creating today, let me pull this up here, is going to look something like this. And this is going to be used on the website based on a true story podcast.com as the featured image for the episode. So this is J.M. Barrie over here. He is the author of Peter Pan. This is the original bill, the brochure from Peter Pan on opening night back in 1904. And this is Sylvia Llewellyn Davies. She is the mother of these 5 children here. And these are the boys that Peter Pan is based on, that J.M. Barrie based the stories of Peter Pan on. This is actually Arthur Davies. That's Sylvia's husband and their father. All right, so let's just dive in and let's start creating this. So I'm going to hop into Photoshop here. And this is just a document. The document is, we look at the pixels here, it's 1920 by 1080 at 72 resolution. And for a lot of these graphics, I like to keep them simple as kind of a kit bash. So I have a lot of different elements that I use, a lot of stock assets and things that I like to pull in order to make the process of creating them not something from scratch every single time. So the first thing I want to pull in here, I have a few different things. I have some wood textures and things like that, but let's pull in this PSD here. This is actually a stock asset from a company called Design Cuts, and they're a great website that has a lot of different stock things. And this is kind of what we're going to pull a lot of elements from. If you saw the image, you saw a lot of the same sort of elements that we're going to pull from here. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to let's take the background. So that's this part here. And I'm going to hold down Control and Shift in order to move this over here. So we have this background here. We can get rid of this guy. So we have our background. I don't think we need that layer there, but let's pull some of these over. So we have backgrounds. Let's take the paper, which is this here. We're going to use that. Pull the paper over. Let's see what else we can use here. I don't know if I'll use all those effects or not. The branch, I'm not really a big fan of the branch. It doesn't really, this part over here looks all right, but this over here doesn't look very realistic to me. Yeah, we'll leave that out for now. The ink, you'll notice I had the ink in the other one, so let's pull this over, and we might be able to use that. Let's leave the stamp. The rest of this stuff I think we can do without. This, again, this doesn't look very realistic. This, especially compared to something like this. This looks a lot better, but this does not. All right, so I think we're pretty good. We can always pull these back if we need to have that file. All right, so let's start here. And if we pull back our page here, or our thing. I have some images that I've downloaded, and these are public domain images, so they're free to use. You can find them if you do searches for them. But these are the images that we'll be working with here. So let's pull all of these in as well, just so we have them in our document. That's pretty small. These are all pretty small. We'll have to scale some of these. So we have our Peter Pan announcement, J.M. Barrie, Arthur and the Sons, and Sylvia. I'm going to rename this. There we go. All right, so let's just start laying this out here. And I'm going to turn these off. I don't know what this layer is, so we can delete it because I don't know what it is. And let's take this, the first one. Oh, you know what? Yeah. Okay. So this here, this might cause some issue. Normally, I like to just select this and then move, but you notice when I'm doing that, it's not working. So I need to actually switch to the move tool, and then that should let me do. Oh, I see what's happening. Okay, so here's what's happening. So this layer here is actually on top. There we go. So that was an issue. This layer here, I didn't see it, but that's because it's multiplied. So if we just go to normal, you can see what this looks like. This is what this layer is. It's just, it looks like it's kind of some noise and things like that. So just adds a little bit to that, which is fine. We might want that, but I'm going to turn that off for now, and that way I can move this around to wherever I want. So let's have the first one kind of be over here. And we have, so this is what this looked like. It doesn't have to look exactly like this. It's just kind of giving us an idea. This is something that I created before just to give us an idea to go for. So it doesn't have to be exactly like that, but something similar I'm happy with. All right, so let's open this up, the smart object, and we should be able to change this design in here. So I'm going to want J.M. Barrie. Let's pull him over. And Control T, we're going to have to scale this up quite a bit. Fortunately, for a lot of these kind of vintage photos, they're not great quality to begin with. They got a lot of grain in there, and so when you scale them up a lot like I just did, it's not like it's a crisp design or anything like that anyway. I can get rid of these. So it's going to be obviously a little distorted, and it's going to have some of that in there. So the actual digital compression elements get hidden a lot in the more vintage aspects of it. So if I save this down there, I can hide this. Oh, need to save this here. And there we go. So we have this in here. So this is Barrie. Now, let's duplicate this, and this will be the Davies boys, and we'll put them over here. So when you just duplicate something like this, it's not going to, well, I'll just show you what it's going to do. It's going to actually change both of them. So if I open this up here and do exactly what we just did, let's come back over here and grab our photo, this one here. Let's take this. And if we take this and we scale it up however we want, I'll just show this because we're going to have to undo this. But if I save this out, do exactly the same thing I just did, watch what's going to happen. Save this, and now it's going to be on both of them, see? So it happens on both of them. The reason for that is because these are smart objects in Photoshop. So they're essentially, they're copies, but they're more instances. So this is pulling from the same source. And so we change that source, and so it changes across all of them, which is really cool and is really helpful in some cases, but that's not what we want right now. So I'm going to come in here, undo what we just did, like I said I would have to do. Save this. Save this one. And now for this one here, what we want to do is come up into Layer, Smart Objects, new smart object via copy. And what that's going to do is to create, well, exactly like what it sounds like. It's going to create a new smart object, which means that it's not pulling from that same source. It's creating a new source. So when I do that, I'm going to need to do it for all of these. Let me come in here. Let me unlink these layers so it removes those. That just kind of is a personal preference of mine. You can link layers. That obviously was in the stock aspect. I didn't do that. I'm not a... It just... I can select the layers and move them all at once if I need to. And I'm going to need to create a new smart object for each one of these. And then I'm going to need to delete the other ones, which I don't remember which those were because I was talking. So let me do this. I'm going to unlink these. And let's make these red. So this guy here is going to be that, and let's change it to orange so we know which ones are the new copies that we're creating right away. And then this one here, and make it orange. So now we just need to get rid of the red ones. There we go. So now if I come in here and update this, do the exact same thing I just did before, now it will show that photo only on the one, and the other one will stay as James or J.M. Barry. All right, so I'm going to delete this. Let's actually select this, and I'm going to crop this down since it's a different ratio. Save that, and then that's going to affect this here. So this paper, we actually want to select this. Let's add a mask onto this paper. Now you'll notice that it turns black. The reason for that is because on this stock they actually have kind of a little bit of reflection. If you look closely, YouTube's compression might get rid of some of that, but you notice it changes just a little bit, slight difference. It's because there's a very slight bit of specular and reflection that happen on paper, and they added that into the stock. Again, that's something that's came with the stock part. But what we can do is we can take this, hold down Alt, and then we can drag it up, and then that will copy those layer masks into these different layers. And what we're left with is this image here. I'm actually going to take this, which is the fold that you see here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to change it a little bit just so it's not exactly the same. Where's this guy? I think it's actually, is it in the paper? It might be. Yeah. So this fold right here is actually in the paper. So let's do this. I'm going to undo so that I have those folds lined up again. And let's move the whole thing just a little bit. Oops. I want to select both of these. Just slightly, so it's not exactly the same. So it looks like two pieces of paper instead of one piece of paper that we've copied, which is what we did, but just change it up just a little bit so it's not exactly the same. And then we're going to have to redo our masks here. So let me get rid of these. And you could check the don't show again, but I'll leave that on. That's fine. So now what we want to do is we'll probably want to, let's actually rotate this just a little bit so it's kind of moving the same. And we'll rotate it again once we actually get it out there. But now if we come in and create this similar to what we did before, that should be good. We still have a little bit of black area there. And you know what? I'm not 100% sure that we need that. I don't think anybody's really going to notice that slight difference. So I'm just going to turn those off. And we left with our image here. And there we go. So we have that. but our shadow, you can see here the shadow does not line up. If we turn this layer off, you can see the shadow there. So I'm going to turn this off just so it's a little bit easier to see the shadow here issue that we have. So what we'll need to do is we actually need to move the shadow. So I'm holding down Control and using the keys, the direction keys on the keyboard. And we're just going to line this back up just to give it a nice little shadow there based on the rotation that we did. Something kind of like that. There we go. And now we want to get rid of this excess. So if we move this, oops, let's move this, all of these actually, you can see there's excess on either side. So we want to, actually, you know what, let's move these up so that it's right there. So we're kind of getting some of that shadow at the bottom too. Very slight, but subtlety is key. So now we can get rid of some of these. So I'm going to use a layer mask and I'm going to paint. So what a layer mask does, if you're not familiar with Photoshop, I'm not really explaining a lot of Photoshop, but if you have questions, by all means, add them to the comments. So basically what a layer mask does is you're painting black and white. And so if I hold down Alt, you can see the actual mask itself. So if I paint black right here, what it's going to do, well, there's no shadow there. That's a bad example. I'm sorry. That's a bad example. Let me do it on this with the paper, right? So if I create a layer mask and then paint black right here, you can see it's showing through. So basically we're painting with transparency, but it's non-destructive. We're not actually editing the image. So if I switch this, hit X in order to switch between your foreground and background colors, switch it to white, I can paint that back in. Super, super helpful for composition for pretty much everything in Photoshop. And so that's what we're going to do here is we're not going to delete any of the shadow just in case. We're working non-destructively. That way we can always bring it back to the original state if we need to. But we're just going to paint these out. And this one here is very slight. And then we're going to do the same down here and paint a lot of this out. And, oh, we're painting with white. That's why. I was painting with white over here. I was like, it's not doing anything. There we go. So you can see kind of what we're doing. And if I wanted to paint that back in, I could do that at any time. So very slight there. And then let's do that on this one because I was painting white. And there we go. So what we're left with is this image here that now we can kind of rotate and put into place where we want. Hit Control T in order to do that. And I'm going to scale this down a little bit. You know, I think I'm going to end up having to scale his down quite a bit too. Because we have a couple more images to put on here. So let's move on to the next one. Now, Sylvia is going to be a challenge. And to be honest, I'm not 100% sure I want to use her image because there's not many pictures of her. And this is one of the best ones, but it's round. It's the only public domain image that I could find was round. So, yeah, I'm trying to think of what I want to do with that. Let's just get started. I'm going to copy this, do what we kind of did before. This is Sylvia, and we're going to need to copy these. So this one here, let's copy it. And then we're going to change the color, anything different, just so we can differentiate which ones we want to keep, which ones we want to delete. And then, now another way of doing this, if you don't want to change the color every time, I guess, is you could just rename these to be whatever you want. And then, you know, if I'll show you if this is just called shadow. And then you actually come in and duplicate this, then it's going to call it shadow copy, and so you know that shadow copy is the one that you want to keep, right? But there's multiple layers here, and it gets confusing pretty quick, so this is just a nice little trick that I'll do sometimes to help me remember which ones I want to keep, which ones are certain things. And then you can always come back and get rid of those colors if you want to. It's just a temporary little thing. All right, so now that we have this separated, let's add her image into it. This one's going to be round. So again, I'm not 100% sure how I'm going to use this. In the little one that I did before, if we pull this back up, I just kept it round, which is a similar concept to what we did over here, pretty much. It's just kind of masking out the round parts. So basically that part here is just coming in. I'll go to switch to the quick selection tool here and just select all the white and then create a layer mask. Control I will invert that. And so we get that effect basically. Pretty simple. Turn off this layer. Just come back over here. Pretty simple process as far as that's concerned. We'll need to change our actual layer mask here to be round as well. And then this guy, we can always move that a little bit if we want to, kind of like what we did before. We can turn that off to kind of stop that. So we have that same sort of basic effect that we had in the sample one. We would need to change the shadow, of course, because it's there. But I'm not 100% sold on the round, so I'm going to try something different. Let's come in here, and rather than having it be round, let's try to find a good square for this. The problem with this is we're losing a lot of pixels, and there's not a lot of pixels to begin with, and that's why I'm not sure if I like square either. So if I get rid of this and apply our layer mask, that would be kind of what it looks like. Which, you know, I actually kind of like that a little bit better. I do think that looks a little nicer. It doesn't stand out as much. One of the things that bothered me about the round one is it really just stands out when we have a couple of other, you know, rectangle ones. So let's keep it this way. So I'm just going to position this shadow kind of on the corner here, kind of like what we did before. Rotate this. It's just kind of tweaking in place. It doesn't have to be 100% because we're going to mask a lot of that out. Kind of like what we did before again. So I still, because I duplicated, I still have my mask here that I painted for this other one. But I can delete this and delete this. And again, I apologize if I'm moving kind of quick. But, you know, I'm trying to get the graphics done, and I thought I'd just go ahead and record this. But if you have questions about Photoshop itself, or if you're trying to create graphics for your own podcast, and you have questions about that, by all means, feel free to let me know, and I'll answer what I can as time permits, of course. Sometimes when you dive into it's kind of like anything. I've been using Photoshop since, what was it, version 5? Version 5, and what are we on now? This isn't the most recent one. I think actually this is version 20. Yeah, there's updates available. So so I've been using it for, it's probably been a couple decades now, and so get really familiar with it. But I will say, so here's a little Photoshop tip. If you're new to Photoshop, here's something that I did when I was brand new, and I forced myself to do this. It was really, really hard, and it was a pain initially. If you hit F twice, that will go full screen. And I did this. I worked like this for about a year. The first year that I worked in Photoshop, I did my best to work like this 100% of the time. And I'll admit there are a few times where I had to switch out of it. You just hit F again, and it'll bring back your screen. But working this way really, really helped me learn keyboard shortcuts. and keyboard shortcuts, like what do you hold in order to move this? Well, I'm on the selection tool right now. How do I deselect this? Control D, deselects, right? And I'm not having to jump to the menu. Or if I want to move this, I can hold down Control and left click and drag in order to move this. And I'm forcing myself to do it that way rather than coming over here, switching to the move tool, and then moving it that way. It will be really slow initially, but the more you learn the shortcuts, the more you practice it, the quicker you'll get it, like anything else. So anyway, that's just a little tip for you there. Let's position her image kind of between these two. And, you know, just a little bit of symbolism there. You'll have to listen to the actual episode to hear kind of the whole story. But she was kind of between... oops, forgot the shadows there. She was... Oh, notice there's a little bit of a shadow there that I need to mask out. But Sylvia was kind of in between James Barry and Arthur. This is Arthur. Arthur is actually Sylvia's husband. And so if you're wondering why James, he was married to somebody else named Mary, you wonder why he was writing about the kids of another woman. That's a question that we'll kind of answer in the podcast as we dive deeper into it. So kind of placing her over here. Unfortunately, I just couldn't. If you have a photo, by all means, let me know. Add it in the comments. I couldn't find a photo of Sylvia with the children and James. That would have been perfect. Like all of them together. I mean, Arthur as well would have been nice, but to be honest, Arthur is not in the movie at all, which, spoiler alert, is one of the inaccurate things about the movie Finding Neverland, is they're taking Arthur out of the picture, at least for the timeline of the movie. But, move these. See, it keeps jumping to this, and that's because this is on top. So... move this. Yeah, I don't like kind of this thing here, so I'm going to get rid of this little crease that we have going on, and let's see how that looks. Not as much of one. There's still a little crease there. Let's do something different. Let's try this. I'm going to add that back in, and then let's duplicate this and give ourselves a little bit more contrast. It's going to change it a little bit, and it helps to hide that just a little bit. Just soften it up just a little bit there. There we go. And it's still, I mean, obviously you can still see it. I didn't want to get rid of it completely, but that's good. I'm happy with that. Sylvia here. Let's place her. So again, I'm thinking I'll put the playbill up here. Hide her. Placement. And maybe need to rotate a little bit, just kind of placing it a little bit here. That's pretty good. And then what I'm going to do is you'll notice when I'm moving hers around, there's this shadow right here I need to get rid of. So it's kind of hard to see over James's photo, but I can get rid of that anyway. Select these, and if I don't want this to move around, I can come in here and where's the, oh, there it is, the lock. Let's lock those. So I can come in and I can move these around if I want to keep hers locked there. So That's pretty good. Get that. I'm trying to get kind of a contrast. So this one's laying this way, and this one's laying this way. And then hers is kind of in the middle here. I'm not sure if I want hers to be on top or if I want it to be down below. Maybe in between. Actually, let me do this. So if the Davies boys, let's move them to the back. I kind of like hers being on top there because you get that nice shadow. It's a little harsh for my taste. So let's soften that up. And then I do want to move it so it's not exactly like right on the line. So it's not, see this line right here. I don't want it to be perfect like that because that's just a little too perfect. And nothing in life is that perfect. So change that a little bit. I think I hid this too much. The shadow there. Oops. Update the fill. Just to bring this back just a little bit. Oh, here's the issue. I didn't move the shadow. I moved your photo, but not a shadow. That was what it was. That's why it didn't look like it was doing anything. There we go. All right, and then I'm going to do one more thing to this, and that's going to be, I'm going to paint in, let me get some dry. So these are some different brushes that I found online. If you really want to know, I can probably find where they are. Maybe, I don't know. I mean, probably got them years ago. I'm just going to taper this a little bit so it's not a perfect square because we masked it as a perfect square. And again, photos are never perfect. They're going to have little imperfections and things like that. So I'm just going to crop this in just a little bit. This might be a little bit much. And then one more thing on this guy here. I'm going to come in and let's change the saturation on this. Just this top one. I'm going to colorize this and change it to be more worn looking. And then this one is going to be, switch my brush back here. This one is going to be just kind of the edge. So we're going to get kind of this worn edge, just very, very slight. See there? Just very, very slight worn edge. I can switch back to kind of my charcoal brush to get a little more grit in there. So it's not real feathered like that. What I was saying is I could probably find where I got those from. Maybe, maybe not. Who knows? But there's a lot of artists out there. If you just do a search for Photoshop brushes, so many artists out there will give away their brushes and just let you use them. And that's usually where I pull them from, is somebody who's created some brushes. So there we go. That's a tad much. So let's maybe add some overlay to that. So what we kind of did was we changed that just to add a little bit of a touch there. And I don't like this little wavy part there. So let's bring this back. Come on, switch to my, hitting B. It's not switching to my brush here. And let me see, what is this? Brush, let me switch. There we go. Should be painting that back. There we go. It wasn't painting back for whatever reason. There we go. I want to pull this back a little bit, so it's not quite. It was a little bit too much there for my taste. And maybe you liked it the way it was. By all means, that's That's where it gets down to preference. That's where a lot of things are. But end of the day, most people are going to look at the picture and not even notice. So they probably won't even know who a lot of these people are without hearing the episode first. So there we go. Bring that down a little bit just to add a little bit of warmness to it. And you know, I think I might actually do something similar for berries. But before we do that, let's pull in one last image here. And this is going to be the playbill for, unlike those, for Peter Pan. So let's come in and duplicate this again. Give this a color. Duplicate. And one thing I will point out, another way if you want to make this faster, is you can come into your keyboard shortcuts and you can actually create a new keyboard shortcut for this if you wanted to. So come down to Smart Object. Let's find it. New Smart Object via copy. So let's say, so Control J is actually in use for layer via copy. So I'm going to do Control Alt J. New layer via copy. Oh, without the dialogue. Yeah, that's fine. Shift. New layer via cut. I hardly ever use that. I'm going to do Control Shift. So Control Shift J. So now that I have that created, now if I hit Control Shift J, that will duplicate that, and that is exactly the same. Oops. Oh well, the color doesn't matter. That is exactly the same as if I came up here and there's my shortcut. See? So another way that you can customize Photoshop to make it faster. And then, of course, again, going back to, you could hit F and then go back and do all your stuff as you need to. Oh, another little tip in Photoshop, you can actually hit Tab in order to hide just the palettes, and that will give you access to the menu still. And that's another way that you can use if you're not really comfortable. Actually, it's been decades, so my memory's a little hazy, but it wouldn't surprise me if I started off initially with something like this so I could still access the menus, and then once you get a little more familiar with how Photoshop works and all that kind of stuff, you can switch to full screen mode in order to do a lot of stuff. Of course, that doesn't give you access to the layers and all that, so if you really need that kind of stuff, then you're going to need to pull the menu back. But let's pull in our play announcement. Here it is. I guess I grabbed an extra something else that I don't need. Here's our play announcement. And let's get rid of Barry. And we're going to crop this in. So I'm just control click on here and then come in and crop. Save. And come over to this. So what I'm going to do on this one is I'm going to actually take this. Let's select this guy here. And move just this one. There we go. Down. And that's going to move it down on that crease line, and it's going to change up that crease again just a little bit in order to make it a little more unique. So there we go. We have that saved, and now we need to move it. So Control T in order to move this around. This here, I'm going to put this kind of big up here since Peter Pan is kind of what everybody remembers. And here we go. We do want to get rid of this shadow up here, so let's mask this out just like we've done before. Kind of like that. And now it's kind of placement. So I like this, but what I think I'm going to do is have this in the background. So you see Peter Pan here, and then these are kind of on top of it. So Barry, I'm going to move him over some. I'm going to make Sylvia a little bit bigger because she's, honestly, she's kind of the star. I mean, I guess the boys are technically because they're the ones that the story's all about. And I guess, okay, I guess they all are because I mean James is the one who wrote it. And I guess if there's any of them that were not really the star of the show, it would be Arthur, because he wasn't really involved in the creation of it as much. So I'm going to select all of them and scale them up a little bit to give me this little composition here. Kind of like that, this in the middle. I'm getting rid of a lot of the wood background, which is fine. The wood background is just there to kind of be the catch there. All right, so now that I've done this, I'm not really sold on that color for the saturation. Oops, that was this here. That was right. Her original photo was that way. So I'm going to take her photo. To get that little arrow, I'm holding down Alt and clicking between. That creates a clipping mask, and so this is only going to apply to this layer below it. If I don't have that, you see it applies to everything below it. So, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this to kind of match that just a little bit, which is going to be kind of an orangish sepia tone, basically. Very desaturated, but I didn't want hers to stand out a lot more. I mean, maybe a little bit, that's fine, but I don't want hers to stand out, like be like, phew, because Peter Pan, the title there is kind of what your eye is supposed to go to first, kind of top to bottom, and then go from there. So, and I think actually I'm going to have hers be behind her children. Yeah, so I'm going to do this. So one of the reasons for that is because there's not a lot over here, so I'm going to make it seem like there's a little more by having it back there. So now it almost seems like there should be more to the picture, which there should be, but it kind of gives that illusion of there being something. Kind of like you go to a restaurant and they got the mirror on one wall to make it seem like there's more there than there actually is. Kind of have that illusion there. We have to clean up this little bit here from this. Oh, that's what it was. I didn't scale this one. Yeah, I didn't scale that. Great. So what I'm going to need to do is to delete that, duplicate this layer again, and then kind of recreate that. That's the problem with doing that beforehand, before you have everything laid out. So that's on me. Shouldn't have done that, but that's the way it goes. Here we go. I just kind of recreate this fade effect. And then come in, add a little bit of, so it's not pure fade, it adds, a little bit to it. That's good. Bring it down quite a bit. Overlay it so it kind of blends in a little bit more, so it just looks a little more like faded edges. Although there's this one part right here, you see that? Oh, that's annoying. Let me turn that off. Pixel grid. So you see how it's kind of straight, and it's pretty easy to tell that that was originally a perfect square with that. So I'm going to get rid of that. There we go. Truly round off that edge. All right, so very, very subtle. And then I'm going to do similar things to Barry's photo. Not as much weathering maybe, because this one is, the image itself is a little more weathered than his. But I am going to come in and, where's that? Hold on a sec. I see this this line right here. That's on Sylvia's. So that's her shadow. This layer right here. So turn that on and off. You can see that that's right. That is right there. So I just need to mask that out. All right. Okay, back to what I was talking about. So I'm going to come in and make it so that these are not perfect squares or perfect edges. Just to get rid of them just a little bit, and just to break it up just a little bit so it's not, so it looks like it's been aged. I mean, because it has been, right? Because it's an old photo. Very, very subtle here. The anti-aliasing on this is not too great on this brush. Not too fond of that part of it, so let's come in and get a more wet one and then add on top of that just a little bit more. That should give us a little more aliasing. There we go. That's a little better. Just to kind of clean that up a little bit so it's not pure pixels. So what I mean by the aliasing there, so you see how it goes from like a dark to kind of the gradient, basically. It kind of fades in. There's not as much of that as if it was really feathered. And that's where you get a lot of these really harsh looking edges, is when it's it looks like it's very pixelated, because it is. And this is hand done, but that's kind of part of it. I just don't want it to be a perfect just entirely perfect. I just want it to look a little more like time has gotten to some of these photos, and that's okay. So for this, what we're going to need to do, I think, is to actually come in and move this. I'm going to unlink all of these and move these over so we get the shadow kind of back there, and then move that up. That's a little better. So here's a before and after. So before and after. Again, it's pretty subtle, but it's going to add just a little more weathering to it, essentially. And then what I can do is I can come in and do something similar to what I did with hers, with Sylvia's. But what I'm going to do is clear out this layer mask and then come in and paint this in. So I have this inside of it. So what it's going to do, if I paint this, is it's going to give me a different type of weathering look, which is something that is good because it's, you know, the photos, they aged in a different box, you know, it's different families, different storage over years, and different aging techniques there. So let's add another layer to this where it's a little more on the edge, and then this one is going to be add and brighten, but not that much, and then we'll want to feather this off. Just slightly. There we go. And then this guy here, feather this a little bit. So again, just, I mean, have fun with it. That's really what it boils down to. End of the day, if you see this picture, you're not really going to know that there was a lot done to it, and that's kind of the point. It's just to have fun with it, to try to turn these separate things into things that maybe it looks like they should go together. What I'm looking at right here is this little shadow, so let's fix that. I think all of these shadows actually need to move over for this image. There we go. And then paint this out. So again, another keyboard shortcut, if you're wondering. So how to size and scale the brush. You can either right click and you can change the scale that way, or you can use the open and close brackets. It's just above the enter key, and just to the right of the P key. The open and close brackets on the keyboard will scale your brush in Photoshop. All right, so for this one, I'm going to do something similar where we change the edges so they're not 100%. Let's pick a different wet brush, just so it's not exactly the same. And just come in here. My mix is a little low. So being wet, it's actually mixing a little bit. And so that's going to give me a little more. See how it's kind of like the wet brush, essentially that kind of effect to it. You can see the wet here, the wetness. It's kind of, think of it like oil. It's kind of what it's trying to mimic in a digital form, where you can swish it back and forth, and it kind of gives you that effect. So it's just something a little bit different in this case where I'm using it. But if you're actually looking to get kind of an oil painting type look, or type feel, that's where it's really useful. So I'm just kind of getting this look and feel to it. I'm gonna go back and clean up the edges, so don't worry about that. Oh, that's Sylvia's. Oh, you hear that in the background? Those are my dogs. They're howling. Now, if I were recording an episode of the podcast, that would be an edit point where I just wait for them to finish, because they are howling at something, maybe somebody outside. Who knows? Different things trigger them at different times. But that, yeah, it makes for an interesting time recording the podcast. So now, okay, so anyway, now that I've got this, and if you didn't hear them in the background, then that's fine too. This mic is not quite as sensitive as the one I use for the podcast. I need this brush, but I want to get rid of my wetness. Where is... Here we go. Just my normal soft round brush. Get rid of some of these harsh edges here. Actually add a little bit of hardness. I mean, it is a picture after all. You're going to have a little bit of hardness there. Just not too much. Give it that still torn look. All right, so the shadow we're going to have to fix. And you know what? Let's just create our new let's create our own shadow. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to duplicate this layer. And then I'm going to move it out just a little bit. And let's just, there's a ton of different ways we can do this. I'm going to change my lightness and just bring it down. And that's going to essentially kind of give us this little shadow here. That is the shape of what we just painted. And I can come in and change the... There we go. Change that, paint this out, And let's bring everything back and kind of see how this is looking. That's good. I like that. We're going to add, I think I had the ink. Yeah, so let's add these guys back. So that you can put the ink kind of off over here. And the cap. Maybe the cap will be down here. There we go. All right. So let's come in and let's select this path and make sure that we save this as episode number 119, hero image. Next step is to save this off. So I'm going to save this as high resolution. This is Control-Shift-Alt-S right here, save for web. And that's going to let me save this. And then the last step here is, let me pull over a new browser window. I'm doing this off screen, sorry. Come on. And it froze. There we go. All right, so let me pull this over. And let's go to tinypng.com. It's a great website for compressing things. If you don't compress your images, it'll take longer to download, it'll take longer to hit your website, and it'll actually hurt SEO. So take this, save it, and then come in here and you can see exactly how much space you save. So 34%. So it went from 386K to 253K, which I'm okay with because that's the hero image, and here it is after we downloaded it. So copy that and then just paste this over. And there we go. So we have our image ready for the blog post, and we're ready to go. So hopefully you enjoyed this little session where we go through and create the graphics for this. Again, be sure to subscribe. You can subscribe to the podcast here on YouTube, or you can subscribe to it through the audio form, which is the primary form, anywhere that podcasts are found, either on Google Podcast, Apple Podcasts, anywhere like that, Spotify, wherever you find podcasts, you can subscribe. Just look for Based on a True Story and do a search for that. So, or of course, you can go to basedonatruestorypodcast.com to see the final result. This episode will not actually be released for another couple months, probably. I like to work a couple months ahead of time. The last thing I would like to point out, that if you want to see more behind the scenes of recording or editing the podcast, then you can hop onto YouTube, subscribe on YouTube. I have a playlist for all the behind the scenes videos, the recording, the editing, creating graphics, things like this. I don't actually have a video for recording Finding Neverland or editing Finding Neverland because I recorded them. I got everything set up and I recorded everything. And I have a new setup. I set up my office differently, and for whatever reason, the microphone that I use, it has a pop filter on it, and I guess that blocked my face just enough that my camera it had a hard time. It kept focusing and defocusing throughout the entire thing. It was trying to find my face as it was trying to focus on. So that's something I need to work out, but unfortunately that means that the next few episodes that I've recorded I can't really use that footage because it just gets to be annoying as it's focusing and defocusing the entire time. So I'll save you from that. But you can find other ones on there where I record and edit the podcast. So thanks a lot for joining me. Again, if you have questions about Photoshop or you have questions about the podcast, by all means, feel free to add them to the comments. And until next time, thanks for watching.